Well, what an awesome thing to be talking about right now. Really, some incredible progress that was made in Congress and with President Biden and Vice President Harris, and really some support that's going to be coming out to Head Start programs first and foremost, but probably more importantly in terms of the long term. Is some broad support that is coming out to children and families across the country, and really a new approach to a lot of different things as well. And so we are so grateful that everyone has joined us today. I know all last week it was wonderful to be on the call at our Leadership Institute, and some of our speakers that are here with us today were also joining us at our Leadership Institute. Really a wonderful week, culminating, of course, in our final day. We were on with the senior staff of the Office of Head Start on last Thursday, I believe it was, and in the middle of their session is when President Biden signed this bill into law. Of course, many of you also remember you were up on Capitol Hill doing virtual Hill visits the same day that the House passed the final bill. Typical House of Representatives, they hear Head Start's coming to town even virtually, and that's when they get the work done and make sure we do that. So we may have to have you guys come into town more often and have some fun with that. No, okay, that was a bad joke. I'll stop. So today's conversation, we have asked a couple of our partners, our lobbyists, our experts in this space to really just to be here to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the American Rescue Plan, because there's a lot. It is a very long, lengthy piece of legislation. It has a lot of wide-ranging provisions that will impact Head Start children and families, as well as Head Start programs. And so, we don't expect that we're going to be wrapping up getting all of the information out today. We have a lot more planned, and Cody will talk about that, I think, as we go. But really see this as the start of the conversation. I would ask that if you please do include in the chat bar any of your questions. We'll be monitoring those throughout the conversation. And we will be posting our slides, I think, to the block at NHSA here, and make sure that folks can have those. Before I dive in, Yasmina, can I put you entirely on the spot to see if you wanted to say anything to anyone?
You know how I like being put on the spot. I
know I'll have to pay for it later. I'm sorry for that.
Greatest off the cuff. Speaker, thank you, Tommy. I will get you yet. Welcome, everybody, and really thrilled with our team being able to bring this session. I think everybody who is on it, we really appreciate your dropping everything to come. It's a very momentous time and all kinds of implications, long-term, short-term, and so on. So thank you, and let's go.
All right, sounds good. Well, on that note, Cody, let's dive into the slides. So I think everyone knows, and I think it's a good grounding to remember just how NHSA approaches all of our work, and that is grounded in our vision and in our mission. Our vision is really the vision for all of you, the vision for the work that you do on a daily basis in Head Start, and that is to be the untiring voice that will not be quiet until every vulnerable child is served with the Head Start model of support for the whole child, the family, and the community. And then advocating to make that happen, working diligently for policy change to ensure that all vulnerable children and families have what they need to succeed. And we believe that that really is the work that you do every single day. And our job, our mission really comes from that vision. And our mission, of course, is to coalesce, inspire, and support the Head Start community as a leader in early child. I guess we can go to the next slide here, in early childhood developments and education, and we feel compelled to fulfill that mission by the promise of a series of outcomes. A powerful, united Head Start voice, a collegial, collaborative Head Start community, nonpartisan support for an increased federal commitment to Head Start, and ultimately that will lead us to healthier, empowered children and families and stronger, more vibrant communities. And I think that this example of what happened with the American Rescue Plan and really what has happened over this past year is a good example of these things taking place. We were saying the same thing. I'm seeing the chat here from folks all the way from Louisiana and Ohio and Minnesota and Washington and Arizona and Texas and so on and so forth, Maine, really all corners of the country. And we were all saying the same thing, that we need support, that our children and families need support. And we worked on a bipartisan basis with our champions on the Hill to be able to get that done, and in the administration to be able to get that done. And so that is, I think, very exciting to see. And that is precisely what we are always trying to cultivate and move forward. But anyway, that is really who we are and how we're approaching things. And let me turn it over to NHSA's Government Affairs Director, who has been leading the charge behind all of this, to dive into more of the specifics and then introduce our panelists. So Cody.
Can you hear me okay? All right, seeing a thumbs up, wonderful. Thank you, Tommy, and thanks to everybody for joining today. Again, my name is Cody Cornack. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at the National Head Start Association, and really excited to have a very full conversation with you all. Just as a reminder, we will be getting to questions at the end. We've saved 15-20 minutes for questions, so please flood the chat with your questions, chat with your peers as we're going through so that we can all build our understanding of what's going on and how it's going to affect the Head Start community together. So, as Tommy said, on March 11th, during the National Head Start Association's Winter Leadership Institute, and in fact, while we were all in a virtual session hearing updates from the Biden administration officials themselves, President Biden signed into law the American Rescue Plan. This is really the first monumental legislative action that he's taken as president that's going to have a direct impact on Head Start. This began as a follow-up to the smaller COVID-19 relief package that was passed in December. So as a reminder, that package included about $250 million for Head Start's COVID-19 work. It was passed along with the annual funding for Head Start, which also included a cost of living adjustment for the Head Start workforce. This package, though, that was just passed, the ARP, has some saying essentially that this law is transformational. The administration and the Democratic leadership are touting the law's ability to be able to bring families out of poverty. So early on, when it was just still a proposal, researchers, for example, at Columbia University estimated that the ARP, or American Rescue Plan, would cut child poverty in half. Now, recently, I think as recently as yesterday, the Urban Institute, which is essentially a well thought of think tank here in DC, says that just 4 key elements of the law alone are going to reduce projected poverty rate for 2021 by more than 1/3. So this is a powerful law we're talking about here. The key takeaway of all of this so far is that the ARP is poised to have a ripple effect that's going to go throughout the communities that we serve. And as trusted programs and partners of so many families, we wanted to start a conversation with you early, not just about staying on top of it or tracking changes, but more so about how we can get ahead of it, really understand the dynamic changes that are about to come about, and ensure that the families who are served by Head Start are going to be put in the best position possible to be successful amid these changes. So we thought that we'd start by building awareness about what changes Head Start can leverage, and that's exactly what we're going to do here today. So as a little bit of a launching place for this conversation, as with any major legislation, there are varied opinions about its approach and about how Congress went about doing it. So the law was born out of a process that Republicans decried as incredibly partisan. Now, at this time, many on the Republican side of the aisle are not happy about how much money the federal government is spending because of this bill, the scope of the bill, which essentially exceeds or goes beyond immediate or acute COVID-19 needs, and the timing of the law as we are still developing this understanding of the long-term socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. So there's a couple of sort of tenuous conversations going on at this time, and Republicans are still looking to figure out what their messaging is around this bill. The politics don't necessarily stop there, though. Many have speculated that the timing of this legislation is not a coincidence, essentially for 2 reasons. The Democrats are steering the House right now in the White House, and they have a very strong foothold in the Senate. And so it wasn't going to be allowed that the Democrats were seen to drop the ball as it came to some of the expiring programs that had recently been passed by Congress last year. So as expirations for these current supports came about, pressure was put on Congress to essentially shore up this legislation and ensure that there wasn't a gap in services for those who were relying on those new programs or new funding streams or expanded funding. So some of these changes are going to last the duration of the entire public health emergencies, and others are going to last a couple of years. That means that Congress is talking about some of these expanded services expiring just as House members and some in the Senate are going to be running competitive campaigns. So in a couple of years, as these programs are expiring, there's going to be a lot of campaigns, and campaign topics like access to healthcare will be back in conversation by then. So with that sort of primary or beginning of an understanding of the big context of what's going on, let's open up the law and see what's going on inside. We wanted to start with a conversation about what the ARP means specifically for Head Start. So we can start with K-12. The plan includes $123 billion for K-12. This is funding that's going to be out there in the world until about September of 2023. So it's going to go through the U.S. Department of Education, then it's going to go to your state's government, then it's going to go to school districts and schools, at which point it's going to be reaching the more day-to-day partners that your community, that are in your community and that your program like works with. The funding can be used for things like addressing learning loss. So a minimum of 20% of each school's tranche of funding must go towards addressing learning loss. So that's an important piece to note there. It's also going to go towards things like PPE, staffing that has to do with student health and well-being, school facilities, so K-12 facilities and after-school activities. And then there's this big piece around summer learning programs. So a big piece of the funding that goes to K-12 is going to go towards summer learning programs to address summer learning loss. Congress is very concerned with summer learning, the learning loss that's happened over COVID-19 and some of the social emotional skills that have been compromised due to remote learning and things like that. So why do we share this? Why are we talking about K-12 in a Head Start in a Head Start conversation? For example, this might be a good time to see if schools in your area or schools that you already partner with are thinking about a summer program for children who are about to enter kindergarten, for example. Maybe there are joint training opportunities that are going to come about because of this new funding. For those who are operating already as part of a school district, we've heard from many who lost their classroom space to schools who needed that classroom space for their older children. And now might be a good time to sort of start jockeying to get that space back when the time comes and when the time is right. Essentially, K-12 is going to have this influx of funding, and let's figure out where those partnerships with Head Start can be most fruitful. There's also funding in there for students with special needs, non-public schools, wraparound services for children who are experiencing homelessness too. So this might be a good time to see if you can be in touch with the McKinney-Vento liaison at local schools to let them know that Head Start is here to support younger siblings of the kids who they're working with, but also see if there's any coordination of services that could be planned as their efforts in this space expand. Quick note on higher education here too. As long as we're talking about K-12, let's keep climbing up the spectrum. So there is $36 billion for institutions of higher education in the plan. That's great, but what's most important for our purposes is that 50% of that funding, so around $18 billion, is going to be spent on emergency financial aid and grants to students themselves. So if parents or staff at your program are in school and they're experiencing financial hardship, their institutions are about to get support to help cut costs. It might be worth thinking about urging connections to financial aid offices now so that they can receive information about how their particular school is going to go about providing that emergency aid directly to students. Always getting ahead of the ball. On the health front, we wanted to touch briefly on the health front as well. There's additional support that's going to be made available for postpartum women through the ARP. The plan permits states to essentially file an option or a state plan amendment that will allow women to maintain Medicaid or CHIP eligibility for up to 12 months after the birth of a baby. So right now, it's just 60 days that happens for in the vast majority of states. According to some trackers, there's about 17 states who have been trying to do this through legislation in recent years. So many have been seeking to extend the care option for women who are new mothers or women who have just given birth beyond the current 60 days. And now this legislation says that can be extended an additional 10 months. So for Head Start's purposes, what does this mean for Head Start? Certainly be thinking about talking to state decision makers or confer with your state Head Start Association or confer with the National Head Start Association. We're always around about what your state's plans are. Only 6 states currently provide this care for the duration that the ARP is going to make much more accessible for all states to do. The changes for this care where women who have given birth can receive care for up to a year postpartum are going to be around for at least 5 years due to the ARP. So this is not necessarily something that's a short-term investment. This is something that can impact a lot of mothers in your state if Head Start engages early. Quick note on housing assistance as well. We had talked about the supports that K-12 will be intentionally providing to children who are experiencing homelessness, but there's also specific housing assistance that's included in the ARP. The Act distributes $27 billion to emergency rental assistance programs, another $5 billion in assistance to people who are experiencing homelessness, and another $10 billion for homeowner assistance in particular. And then in addition to that, there's funding for a program called LIHEAP, or Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. There's about $5 billion for that. And there's another $500 million for low income household drinking water and wastewater assistance. So essentially there's help not only for the housing aspect, but also for the utilities bills. That's the big takeaway here. So much of this is intended to be direct aid to families that have been struggling with housing, with utilities bills. It's meant to shore up the housing insecurity that has been brought about by COVID-19. And so again, this is another place where it's a really prime time to start having those conversations in your community about how these funds will be spent down. So we had talked about warming up the chat box earlier, and now would be a great time to share in the chat about who you're partnering with to support the housing needs of your children and families. Maybe peers on here will give you ideas, and maybe you'll get ideas from the chat, but share in that chat box right now. Where do you go for housing supports for families in your community? And then think about reaching out to them in the coming weeks and months to ensure that you can help to shape this funding so that Head Start families can get access to it as they need. Now, I saved the best for last. Childcare and Head Start. The Act provides billions of dollars for childcare. That's $15 billion directly to the Childcare and Development Block Grant and $24 billion for childcare stabilization. Both tranches of funding here are going to go to your state. So be in touch with childcare providers near you who are eventually going to be applying for these funds. Make sure that you're watching what your state is saying about particularly the childcare stabilization funding. Be in touch with childcare advocates in your state. Be in touch with your Head Start collaboration office, just so that we can ensure that Head Start's voice is being heard as priorities are made within your state about how to disseminate this funding. The ARP also includes $1 billion in Head Start funding. That means that what your program is going to receive because of this bill will be 4 times what you received due to the December bill. So you're going to be able to use this funding across the services that you provide, all services across the grantee. And our understanding is that information will come very soon from the Office of Head Start about the timing of this funding, access to this funding, and all of those good details. So before I turn it back over to Tommy, I wanted to share with you that the National Head Start Association is going to be sharing information in the coming days, weeks, months that are ahead about how to access these benefits, about how to make the most of these community partnerships. Next week, we will be publishing a guide that is maybe best described as a nesting doll or a nesting guide, where there will be information for program directors there. There will be information for the program management, family service workers, and such that are specifically talking to changes that might be most relevant to your position. And then there will be the changes that are most relevant for children and families themselves. So the families piece will be translated into Spanish. We're excited to be able to provide those resources to you and to be able to do that in a timely fashion and make sure that it's most relevant to the work that you're doing, so that you're not having to sort through all of the noise and speculation that might be out there. So we're excited to keep communicating about this in the coming weeks. I know that was a whole lot of information. We are always available at advocacy@nhsa.org to answer additional questions, but the webinar is not over yet. We're actually only about 1/3 of the way there. There is a ton left to talk about with the ARP. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Tommy to introduce the panel of experts who are going to talk about the things that aren't quite in NHSA's or Head Start's wheelhouse. And so we're really excited to be joined by the experts. Tommy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Cody. Yes, as Cody said, we are joined by three experts who we work with on a frequent basis in their teams, and know that they are all individuals who cover wide arrays of various components that are talked about throughout the American Rescue Plan, and are going to be able to know a lot more specifics. I'm seeing a lot of questions, a lot of questions about getting this information and additional resources. And yes, this is the first of a series of resources that we're going to be releasing. We will be sure to post the recording of this on our on the block with the slides as well. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to Charlie Ovino and Radha Mohan, who are both with our partners, the Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck team. Brownstein has worked with NHSA since, I believe, 2017. We've worked with them, although we've worked with Mark Lampkin, one of the principals over there, for decades now. It feels like for much longer than that. I've had Mark involved in a lot of different things. So without further ado, let me turn it over, Charlie and Radha. I don't know which order you guys are diving into, but if you want to direct us on which slides to go to, and we can dive in with more specifics.
That's the perfect slide. It's Charlie Ivino. I'm happy to start here. The ARP provides for recovery rebate checks in the amount of $1,400 for each adult and dependent. You can see on the chart below, we compare the ARP checks with the consolidated appropriations checks, which were issued after the December bill, and with the CARES Act that were issued last spring. Again, the base rebate is $1,400, and that includes for each dependent, and dependents can be either children or adults that meet the definition of a dependent in the Internal Revenue Code section 152. I also wanted to raise, before we leave this slide, that there are valid Social Security number requirements. You will recall under the CARES Act, both spouses needed to have a valid Social Security number to be able to claim these benefits. However, the Consolidated Appropriations Act actually fixed that problem from the CARES Act. So now at least one spouse needs to be have a Social Security number in order for the dependent to be able to collect the dependent dollars. Next slide, please. And in terms of how these dollars are going to be determined, obviously there's a limit. It phases out at $80,000 for a single, 160 for married filing jointly, but amounts are going to be based on a taxpayer's 2019 tax returns, unless the taxpayer has both filed a 2020 return and the IRS has processed that return. I know Radha's going to talk a little bit about timing of those and how you might want to structure that, but I wanted to identify at least 3 areas of concerns that people have. For those who are non-filers, those are primarily recipients of Social Security, SSI, or certain VA benefits. Those payments will be based on the information that Social Security currently has. So if they, for example, do a direct deposit, that money will go directly into your account. Non-filers who are not recipients of these kinds of benefits may claim the credit by filing a 2020 tax return. So even if they aren't normally required to file, if they file a 2020 tax return, they can claim those benefits. Filers who do not have a bank account, the IRS will mail the payment to the address the IRS has on file. And for lost rebates or rebates that weren't received, eligible individuals can claim the credit on their 2020 return filed in 2021. I'm going to turn it over to Radha now.
Thanks, Charlie. Cody, if we could go to the next slide. Payment. So I'm going to go through a high-level overview of the mechanics of claiming the recovery rebate credit for individuals who do not receive a stimulus check. If you do receive the stimulus check, then you're in the clear. Generally, when you file your tax return and you go to line 30 on your return, it'll allow you to claim a credit if you, for some reason, did not receive the stimulus check, or you've experienced a change in income, specifically a decline in income, and you should be entitled to a higher payment. Next slide. Payments are not taxable, and you won't have to pay back your stimulus check money due to increases in income. It really only works in one direction, and that's if you have a decline in income, you can file, you can essentially file for the recovery rebate credit. The other thing, next slide, that I wanted to address is something that Charlie said right up top. You do have a little bit of control potentially about when you're filing and whether the stimulus check amount that you receive is based off of your 2019 income or your 2020 income. And you may want to think about that a little bit before filing your return this season. If you earned more in 2019 than you do in 2020, then you probably want to accelerate and file your 2020 return. Similarly, even if you earn more in 2020 than you did in 2019, if you have a new dependent child, for example, in 2020, you may want to accelerate and file your return based on your actual income. That's a calculation that you'll have to do. Otherwise, if you earn more in 2020 than you do in 2019 and have the same number of dependents, you probably want to delay filing your 2020 return. Again, this is just general advice, not taking into account specific facts and circumstances, and without knowing what exact income levels are for everyone. Cody, on the next slide, we'll move on to a discussion of the refundable credits. Earlier, you all heard discussion of the Childcare Stabilization Fund increases to CCDBG, Head Start funding, and CCES. These are the direct funding pieces. There are also two very important tax credits that were included that provide assistance to to families that could potentially help with the cost of care. The child tax credit is a general credit, so it's not specific to child care expenses necessarily, but there's a lot of flexibility as to what people can use the credit for. We do currently have a child tax credit under current law. The bill increased the credit from $2,000 with $1,400 being refundable to $3,600 for children under the age of 6 and $3,000 for children between 6 and 17, and made the credit fully refundable as well. So that's essentially a benefit of $1,000 or $1,600 per child, which can add up quickly if you have multiple dependents. The phase-out threshold for the additional $1,000 or $1,600 credit, so the increase from current law, starts to phase out at $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for joint filers at a rate of $50 for every additional $1,000 that you have in adjusted gross income. So if you have a child over the age of 6 for individuals, if you earn more than $95,000, you won't benefit from the additional credit. However, you will still likely benefit from the current base credit of $2,000. The phase-out threshold for the base credit of $2,000 remains unchanged. It's still $400,000 for joint filers and $200,000 for all other filers. So really a very significant benefit provided by the CTC. The last thing that I'll note is you might have heard a lot of reports about advance payments now being available. Advance payments will potentially be available starting in July. The Treasury Department is yet to set up a system to get families periodic payments. Ideally, they'd like to get families monthly payments on 50% of the value of their credit between July and the end of the year. The Biden administration is, of course, hoping to see this credit extended permanently, or at least extended on a long-term basis. So they're hoping that an advance payment system is something that'll be beneficial moving forward. Of course, it's unclear whether they'll actually be successful in those efforts. Something to note that you should look out for information on the advance payments. The IRS is setting up a portal, and if you want to receive your payment as a lump sum after you file your return, you'll have to opt out of the advance payment system. So just keep your eye out for those communications. The second credit that we wanted to bring your attention to is on the next slide. It's the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. Different from the child tax credit, which you automatically receive if you have a dependent, but for providers and for folks in the early care and education space, this is really targeted to people that have child and dependent care expenses that are related to work. So essentially related to the parent or the caregiver going to work and then having expenses that stem from that. Over here, the credit was increased significantly. It went from being a non-refundable credit to being fully refundable. They changed the phase-out thresholds as indicated on the table. But really, the most significant benefit over here is that maximum qualifying expenditures went from being $3,000 for one child and $6,000 for two or more children to $8,000 for one child and $16,000 for two or more children. And additionally, previously the income phase out threshold, so the credit used to start to phase out at $15,000. And at $43,000, $43,000 and above, you received a very small value for the credit without any income limitations. This bill changed that so that the credit only starts to phase out at $125,000 and really only fully phases out, or you can't receive any value from the credit starting at $500,000. So, you know, under the previous system, you could earn $1 million in income and still benefit from the credit. Now they've tried to target it so that it's going to low income, middle income, and upper middle income families. And the main thing to note over here is this is on top of subsidy. So you could have a family that's receiving subsidy and on top of that still receive the child tax credit and also receive the child and dependent care tax credit. The maximum value of the credit also went up from $2,100 for two or more children to about $8,000 for two or more children. And there's an example provided on the slide that walks through the mechanics of the credit. And I'll turn it back over to Charlie to segue to unemployment benefits.
Thanks, Rada. Unemployment benefits, just sort of a high level set. Generally, the unemployed individuals are obviously entitled to a state benefit amount, which is on average targeted at 50% of what your wages were. It varies from state. It may not always be at the 50% level. The ARP actually extends the $300 plus up per week. That's the federal pandemic unemployment compensation until September 5th of 2021. You will remember that the consolidated appropriations bill had the plus up at $300, and that actually sunsetted last Sunday. And so that was one of the big pushes to get this reconciliation bill done so they could continue the plus up. And there was some discussion. The House bill had it at $400. Senator Manchin from West Virginia actually said he would prefer it to be $300 for a little bit longer time. So that is where the Senate ended up with respect to the unemployment benefits. In terms of their taxation, the ARP for the first time exempted for 2020 the first $10,200 in unemployment benefits. And there's a mistake on our slide there, which we want to correct. So it's $10,200 of unemployment benefits are actually exempted from tax. Above this, both the state unemployment and the plus up are taxable, but the plus up does not affect eligibility for either Medicaid or CHIP. And I think I've seen some discussion in the chat room about that. And the plus up also doesn't count towards the earned income tax credit eligibility. By January 1st of this year, people who were unemployed and receiving unemployment benefits should have received a Form 1099-G from their state, indicating that the state had paid unemployment benefits, how much had actually been paid, and how much of the taxes had been withheld, so that you can incorporate this into your filing for 2020. And if you live in a state, there are actually 7 states that do not have state income taxes, and there are an additional 6 states that exempt unemployment benefits for tax. So if you're in one of those 13 states, you would actually not have to claim your unemployment towards your income tax requirement. And if you receive an unemployment payment for 2020, but you don't receive it until 2021, it's actually reported in the year when it's received. Next slide, please. And in terms of special eligibility, applicants will need to self-certify that they are partially or fully employed or unavailable or unable to work because of the following circumstances. You can see that these are sort of all set out. You have a diagnosis, a member of your household has a diagnosis, you're providing care for someone who's been diagnosed, you're providing care for a child or a different household member who can't attend school or work because they're closed. We've seen a lot of that this past year. You're being quarantined, you're scheduled to start employment, but you don't have a job or you can't reach your place of employment. You've become the breadwinner for a household because the head of household has died as a result of COVID. You've had to quit your job as a direct result of COVID. Your place of employment is closed as a direct result of COVID. I will note specifically that workers are not eligible for the plus up if they can telework or are receiving paid sick days or paid leave, and undocumented workers do not qualify. Next slide.
Before we move on to a quick overview of the health provisions, there is one thing that I wanted to note just based on some of the activity in the chat. Generally the CTC, the CDCTC, the stimulus check payments, none of those are counted towards the definition of AGI or your income. For unemployment benefits, the first $10,200 are not counted as income, or they're tax exempt essentially. The remainder, it's not counted as income for the purposes of Medicaid, CHIP, and EITC. Though beyond that first $10,200, you do owe taxes on those amounts. So just wanted to make the distinction over there that it counts as income for tax purposes, but not necessarily for the calculation of certain benefits. And the last thing that I would note is, we mentioned some state-specific information in the slide. Just keep that in mind as you go through the calculation, because how your state treats unemployment benefits will go into this determination as well.
Radha, thank you for that clarification. Just a brief touch on some health and benefit provisions. Probably the one that's gotten a lot of focus in the ARP is that the bill provides a retroactive 100% Cobra subsidy for individuals who have lost their group health coverage. Now, when it says retroactive, it doesn't mean you're going to get last year's health care for free, but it does count back to April of last year, so that your 18 months, which is normally covered by Cobra, the last 6 beginning in April 1st of this year through the end of September, will actually, if you elect Cobra, your employer will provide you with a second Cobra election notice. And if you elect Cobra, you will receive that benefit for 6 months of this year without having to pay the premium that you would normally have had to pay under Cobra rules. With respect to the premium tax credit, I wanted to note that this, the ARP actually extended the premium tax credit to individuals whose states have not expended Medicaid under the ACA. It also states that individuals receiving unemployment insurance will be pegged at 133% of the poverty level with respect to the payments that the subsidies they're entitled to. And finally, it removes the income cap so that no one will pay more than 8.5% of income for a premium per month. And I wanted to note that both the paid sick leave and the paid FMLA leave that were enacted early, actually even before CARES in the FFCRA back in March, are being extended. Those credits are being extended. The employers that are impacted are those who have fewer than 500 employees. They are no longer mandated that they must provide these paid sick leave and paid FMLA credit or leave, paid leave. But if they do provide the leave, they are able to claim the credit. These credits are refundable, but only with respect to the HI tax, the 1.45% tax, and that's just a function of the way the reconciliation process worked in the Senate. It was limited to that. So those credits will actually continue and be effective through the end of September of 2021. Did you want to say anything more before we finish?
Nope, nothing else. I think that just about covers everything.
Excellent. Thank you both. And Radha, thank you for, I see you responding to questions that are coming in here too, as we were going. Really appreciate that. I know there's a ton of questions. We're going to get to as much as we can, and then also make sure that we can continue to share information that may address some of these questions that folks have. So next, I'm not sure if we lost him or not, but Lee, are you still with us, or are you with us? Oh, excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, let me turn it over to you. If you wanted to share any kind of some of the broad implications of some of this, and then we'll turn and try to get through as many questions as we have time remaining at the end of the hour.
Okay. Can you see me, Tommy, or can everyone see me? Okay.
We can see you, and I realize, Lee, I didn't introduce you. So for those of you that don't know Lee Foley, we've been working with Lee and his firm, Capitol Hill Partners, has represented Head Start now for goodness, probably almost 10 years at this point, although it's probably a little bit less than that. Lee has a deep history involved in Head Start from close to the founding of Head Start, not quite that long, but close to it, and has a deep connection both in terms of direct programs as well as the overall federal overview. Long story short, if you ever want advice from and a lot of members of Congress are included in this about really programs like Head Start, like community action, like just a wide variety of domestic and pretty much anything domestic policy wise, you go to Lee Foley, and Lee will have the answer, or will know the people who will be able to connect you there. So if that's not a ringing endorsement, I don't know what is, but Lee, let me flip it over to you to dive into it. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I hope we have that on tape. I'd like to use that again. Hi, everybody. Thanks to Charlie and Radha for that great presentation, and to Cody for think how long it took Cody just to talk about the bill. It's going to be a huge task to implement this bill. And so Cody and Tommy and Yasmina asked me to talk a bit about what is transformational, not only about this bill, but about where we may go from here. And there's a lot that's transformational. So many of you are veterans of serving children and families back when we had a total economic collapse after the 2007 economic events, and when the federal government and other governments invested to try and help all of us, all of our families, all of our communities recover. If you look back at what that dollar amount was compared to the now 6 bills that have passed to help with COVID relief. We're only at the relief point now. We're not at the recovery point yet. It is a massive amount of money compared to that 2008 level of investment that the federal government made. So that part of it in itself is transformational. But also some of the elements that Cody and Rada and Charlie talked about are transformational in and of themselves. Yes, they are time limited, and I'll get to that in a minute. In many cases, they're time limited, but they are transformational in terms of our federal safety net. So we have, for instance, the tax provisions. Those tax provisions, as you've already heard, are pretty significant. I would add one more. So the child tax credit, the child care and dependent tax credit, and the earned income tax credit was also expanded in this bill. The latter was expanded to include childless younger workers, and that's a significant and historic change in the program. So the dollar amounts that are involved are quite large. The effect on family income is quite large, and it creates new aspects to our federal safety net. It is the intention of the administration and members of Congress, and I was fortunate to be able to talk twice actually in the last 24 hours to the prime sponsor of the child tax credit expansion, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the chair of the Appropriations Committee. She is determined to ensure that the child tax credit expansion is made permanent in future law, meaning before this one-year provision expires, and to address a number of the elements that are new and perfect those elements that Rada mentioned. So for instance, the larger tax credit, the larger amount for younger families with younger children, the making permanent the full refundability of it, making, if IRS can do it, making it a monthly payment for families. So a family with a younger child, that would mean $300 a month or more if there were multiple younger children. And then for older children, slightly less than that. But if IRS can do it monthly, IRS is not sure yet they can do it monthly. If not, they would do it quarterly. So to make that a permanent feature of our federal safety net. The same with the child and dependent care tax credit. The same with EITC. It probably gets a little bit more difficult with EITC, but these programs are broadly popular, partly because they are more universal than some of the other programs. So a very large percentage of children, and therefore their families, will benefit from this expanded child tax credit. And when you have more residents of our country benefit from the programs, they are more popular, and therefore it is more possible to make them permanent. In addition, unemployment insurance has been greatly expanded by the various pandemic bills. Unemployment insurance is a system that was created for an industrial age. The United States economy is no longer in an industrial age. Do we still have industrial components and elements? Yes, we do. But the design of unemployment insurance doesn't capture the broader workforce. The temporary programs that were created by COVID relief bills do a pretty good job of capturing the broader workforce. So there is an intention and an aspiration to address unemployment insurance reform going forward. As several people have mentioned, there is a dramatic expansion of the Child Care and Development Block Grant. Just about 4 years ago, Senator Patty Murray, who's now chair of our Head Start Authorizing Committee and chair of our Head Start Funding Subcommittee, was chair of the Budget Committee, and she struck a budget agreement that had an aspiration of reaching over 4 years to $6 billion in childcare and development block grant. We were at $1.5 billion at that point in time. We are now at tens of billions of dollars for the childcare and development block grant as a result of the multiple COVID bills. The question is how much of that can be hung on to in regular appropriations. Again, speaking to Congresswoman DeLauro, she is determined to hold on to a large portion of those dollars in the regular appropriations process. So transformational in size, transformational in change in our federal safety net program, potentially transformational in making them permanent, and also different than 2008. Most of the aid is going directly to individuals and families. In 2008, that was not the case. And so people are going to feel, and it's going to transform their view of public programs. They're going to feel the effects of it more. Going forward, this administration, the Democrats in Congress, and in some cases Republicans in Congress, want to do transformational things. It's not entirely clear how the next bill, the next mega bill, and it is likely to be a mega bill, will play out, and that will be the Recovery Act. The centerpiece of it will be infrastructure, and we will probably see that piece first. We won't see the whole package coming from the administration. Infrastructure, in the administration's view, in the House Democrats' view, will be writ large, things that we don't think about as infrastructure. More these days, we do think about broadband as infrastructure, but historically, the United States has not thought about broadband as infrastructure. We have not thought of water systems necessarily as infrastructure, but infrastructure is going to be writ larger than that. Other kinds of systems are going to be thought about. Our manufacturing systems, our critical manufacturing systems are going to be thought about as part of infrastructure. But we won't see the whole package right away. Later, probably in April, we'll see that part of the package. The committees will begin work on that, but eventually there probably won't be agreement with the Republicans, and so we'll see this second mega bill transfer into another reconciliation bill. So it would only require 50 votes in the Senate plus the vice president and only a majority in the House, mostly Democrats, probably all Democrats. As we likely turn to a reconciliation bill, we will begin to see other features besides infrastructure writ large begin to be incorporated, and these will be transformational items. If it's done on reconciliation, there is a question. Reconciliation has strong limits to it. So how much transformational legislating can you do? But I want to just run through some of the aspirations for transformational legislation that could go into this next mega bill. One would be workforce. We lost 10 million jobs during the pandemic. Most of them have been on the lower wage, lower skilled end of the spectrum, of the workforce spectrum. That is a huge collapse of that category of jobs, but it is a trend that has been going on for a decade or more. It's a really big number, but it's already been a big number over 10 years. At the same time, we've had roughly 10 million higher wage, higher skill jobs emerge during the pandemic. That too is a continuation of a trend. When that was a trend previously, and with these huge numbers now, the federally supported workforce development system is not capable of addressing these dramatic changes. So Congress, particularly Chairman Scott, also Chairwoman Murray, want to look at transformational changes in our workforce development system. Transformational changes in our post-secondary education system, which also is part of our workforce development system. Those changes could be really important to Head Start families, Head Start employees, Head Start employees who are looking to move upward in their career pathway. We're likely to see efforts to cancel a certain amount of student debt. Number one, it probably will be $10,000 in student debt. And that cancellation, very importantly, will probably be proposed to be tax-free. Be a big deal for a low-income student borrower if they got a $10,000 elimination of their student debt and come to find out a little later in the year that IRS is sending them a bill for $2,500, which they'd have to pay right away. So that's an aspiration of the Congress, of the administration. Also an aspiration is to make community college free for families up to $125,000. Also to make four-year college free or lower cost for those same families. Given what you can potentially get through Congress, that may turn out to be more of a last dollar program. After all other aid is exhausted, the federal government would step in with the last dollars necessary. But that would be a huge transformation of the way post-secondary education is paid for. Finally, a change in our higher education policy, Title IV, which is student financial assistance, to begin permitting the use of those dollars by post-secondary institutions and their partners to provide workforce credentials, not just degrees, but workforce credentials as well. Again, this could be very important to Head Start families who want to move into the workforce or move up in the workforce, and also to Head Start personnel in terms of their career pathway in early childhood development. I mentioned infrastructure already, infrastructure writ large, but also infrastructure focused on climate change. And so we're going to see many transformational aspects, maybe things we wouldn't think about as being part of an infrastructure initiative. Things like incentives for all of us as consumers, perhaps large incentives, large dollars amounts, hundreds of billions of dollars for us to purchase energy efficient vehicles, whether that be electric vehicles or whatever, but energy efficient vehicles.
And this is like
lots of money for research into climate related infrastructure investments. Transformational in terms of our national security and our health security. Congress would like to, this administration would like to, in this next mega bill, onshore our supply chains that are critical to our national defense and critical, as we've learned in the pandemic, to our health systems and other critical manufacturing capabilities. Transformational in terms of making American leadership in artificial intelligence, in internet platforms, in robotics, in advanced manufacturing. So all of these things are going to be considered as part of the next mega bill. How that bill plays out, how much of it, particularly infrastructure, might possibly generate bipartisan support. If you have to go into a reconciliation mode in order to get the next mega bill passed, how much will the reconciliation limitations constrict the transformational aspects to these pieces of legislation? But I think you can hear the transformational aspirations, including starting with making permanent things that are already in law but are temporary, and then moving on to these systems that are ripe for change in the American economy through public policy. So, Tommy, I think I'll stop there, and maybe we have time for questions.
I think, yeah, and I think we're actually over time right now. I think we had this scheduled for an hour, so do want to be respectful of calendars here. Do really appreciate, Lee, thank you for your comments there. Thank you to everyone for all of these questions and everything coming in here. There's a lot of great questions. I know I've been trying to respond to as many as we can, and Radha, you've been typing away as well in response to all of this. Lots of questions around the impact that this will have on Head Start eligibility and enrollment. The short answer is many of these, the one-time payments and the unemployment and things like that should not be impacting Head Start eligibility in perverse ways. However, again, we're going to continue to put additional resources out to you to get that as explicit as possible. I think it's important to recognize that during the CARES Act, the Treasury Department did make the determination that additional stimulus checks, for example, as well as some of the tax subsidies that came out were considered, and on additional unemployment benefits were considered basically stimulus one-time funds. So therefore they were not to be counted for program eligibility, such as Head Start eligibility. And so it is looking like that is the case with these additional funds that are coming through here too. Now, I recognize we are 6 minutes over. I want to be respectful of time, but Charlie or Radha or Lee, anything else you all wanted to add before we wrap up? Again, more resources to come, many more conversations to come, and as I think Lee said it very well at the end too, a lot more of this information is going to be trickling out in the weeks and months ahead as well. Nothing to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay. All right, so please keep an eye out. We will send, as I had shared earlier, these slides and a recording of this. I know this is a lot of information all at once. We'll be posting it up on the block, and we'll make sure to send out a link in our NHSA in Action letter that we get out every Friday. So please keep an eye out for that. Thank you again for all the comments, seeing a lot of good comments about the needs on facilities, the concerns on staff well-being and support for staff, in addition to what we can do to continue to support families, especially new Americans, immigrants, or folks who are on visas, seeing questions in that space too. Keep passing questions like that on to us. We will put together a number of resources and are intentionally trying to create resources that will go that will be able to, that you can use or your family service staff can use directly with your parents. We are also always looking for help with translation. Any of the documents that we put out, we are going to try to be putting them out in both English and in Spanish to the extent possible, and would welcome if you or your program has other languages or dialects that you know would be helpful to translate in, and somebody on your staff could help kind of crowdsource out the translations and be able to then share those. We do not have a pride of ownership on that. We would love to see these types of resources, especially for parents, make it into languages that they are able to understand. And so if you ever have questions on that, don't hesitate to reach out to NHSA. We're happy to forward you the original copies or the Word versions of it versus the PDFs and all that jazz, so that you can assist with that. And we would love then to be able to share that with your other colleagues, because they may find that there's other important reasons to share that too. So again, more to come. Cody, do you wanna say anything else to take us home, or are we good to go?
I think that Tommy's spot on. We've been watching the questions in the chat. We appreciate you sharing your questions. We will have a resource out to the field next week that's applicable across different audiences, right? So there will be one resource for directors and then adaptations to that, depending on what audience is taking a look at that resource. And that's just the start of it. So we're really excited that you all joined us today to start this conversation, and thank you for your time and engagement.
Absolutely. Thank you. And one more time, Charlie, Radha, and Lee, thank you so very much. As you all can tell, we have some of the best experts working on our behalf here in Washington. We're very grateful for that. And Head Start community is lucky to have such great and brilliant minds as well. Hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful week. And let's be sure to stay in touch. Take care, everyone.